Israel in Norfolk since 1992. Active in the field of adult Jewish education, he is taught for the Jewish Community Center of Tidewater, the Jewish Museum and Cultural Center of Portsmouth, and many synagogues. He's been an adjunct professor of religious studies, history, and Hebrew language at local colleges, William and Mary, Virginia Wesleyan University, and Old Dominion University. He's quite well known in the area, everyone. Rabbi Panitz is committed to ecumenical dialogue and programming. For the past decade, he has served as the rabbi in residence at Christ and St. Luke's Episcopal Church in Norfolk, preaching and teaching there regularly. He has taught at approximately a dozen churches in Southampton Roads, the Eastern Shore, in North Carolina. And it's wonderful to spread the knowledge because we all need to hear, to relearn, and to listen to him tonight as he's a wonderful speaker. So, Rabbi Panitz.
Well, thank you, Judy. I think that my friend, the Chaplain Uwe, has to look to his laurels now, because you've put down your marker for introductory remarks. Friends, do you each have a handout, 2 sides of a page? This handout is a revision of a lecture outline that I created for a course on world religions that I created for Virginia Wesleyan College. Back then it was a college. And I've changed it a bit because there are certain features of the difficulties of life today that make me highlight certain points in it. But this fits into what we're doing tonight, and I want to say that for someone who's just joined us. We're in the midst of a 5-lecture series. 6 programs, but 5 lectures. 5 lectures on aspects of world religions, and the 6th program is a demonstration Passover Seder. Looking out at our assemblage, I know some of you have been here for the last year or 2 celebrating the Passover Seder with me, and certainly, Judy, you're familiar with that as well. So it's an honor to be here at the Chesapeake, but I have to convince my maps function not to send me to the delivery entrance each time. Because it sent me to the wrong entrance, and I had to do some dead reckoning to find my way to the right entrance, and eventually I found my way in. And it's well worthwhile, because once I come in, I see your smiling faces, and I hear the very astute questions that I'm likely to get, and I know this was worth every mile. Friends, some religions are classified by the basics of what they believe in. If we took that taxonomy of religion, we'd find that many religions of the world are polytheistic. They have many gods. Historically, the polytheistic religions were the earlier ones. The Greeks, the Romans, the Persians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the ancient Egyptians all had many, many gods. The Canaanites had many gods. The other type of religion is called monotheistic, one God. Judaism is the oldest monotheism. There's another religion which has 2 gods, but not more than 2. That's the ancient Persian religion, Zoroastrianism, a god of good, a god of evil. But Judaism has a very important daughter religion, and that is Christianity, a religion, I dare say, with which almost everyone here is quite familiar. And there is a third monotheistic faith, almost as numerous as Christianity, not quite, but almost, and that is Islam. It's third in the sense of being historically the third to have been created. Islam is younger than Christianity by 6 centuries, and Christianity is younger than Judaism by about a millennium and a quarter. So Islam is by far the youngest of the 3 monotheistic faiths, and that means that it first saw the light of day in a world that already had Jewish and Christian beliefs and stories and ways of looking at the world. I'd like to begin my analysis of Islam by telling you the historical setting, geographical and historical setting. Islam is born in the Arabian Peninsula. And to this day, the Arabian Peninsula is considered the heartland of Islam. The Mecca, the city in the Arabian Peninsula, is the spiritual center for worldwide Islam. And there are pilgrimages that millions and millions of Muslims will make on an annual basis to Mecca. So, what was Arabia 1400 years ago? It was a backwater. It was kind of like a third world country. What were the major powers of that era? There were 2. Well, I'm not talking about China. China was always a major power, but further, beyond the political horizons of the part of the world we're looking at. The 2 major powers in the Middle East were the Eastern Roman Empire, which by this time was called the Byzantine Empire, or just Byzantium after its capital city. Constantinople was what Byzantium was renamed, Eastern Roman Empire. And to the east of the Eastern Roman Empire, the Persian Empire. So the Roman Empire in the year 600 would have included modern-day Turkey, modern-day Greece, modern-day Egypt, Libya, maybe Morocco, Sicily, the southern part of the Italian boot. That was pretty much, and of course the countries near the Danube, Bulgaria, Macedonia, Romania, that part of the world. That was the Eastern Roman Empire. The Persian Empire would have included Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, that area. They would have fought over the land of Israel. It was the borderline between them, and Syria. Go back and forth, back and forth. These 2 empires had been at war with each other since time out of mind. Neither one could conquer the other, but they had an endless round of costly wars. For each of them, the Arabian Peninsula was not a place of great strategic interest. There were some caravan routes that would traverse there, some Indian Ocean routes, and then some caravan routes that would go up into the areas where the 2 empires were more interested. But they saw it as a place not deserving of too much attention, certainly not too much allocation of force, because they were focused on each other. A little bit like the French, preoccupied with the Germans and building up the Maginot Line and not thinking at all about Belgium. You think about the 20th century analogy of that. Who was in Arabia? They were not a nation, they were not unified, they were tribes, various Arab tribes. What makes a tribe and not a nation? A tribe is essentially an extended family that regards itself as descended from some common ancestor. So the tribes are often called the children of. You have tribal societies in the Hebrew Bible, the children of Moab, the children of Ammon. So you can see that there are certain tribal societies, even the children of Israel, because they were 12 tribes before they became a unified nation. So the Arabs of Arabia had tribes. They had a few cities which were important for commercial purposes, but they were not unified. They had their different gods. The main god in Mecca was a moon god, and there was this polished stone shrine, which was an important pagan shrine in Mecca. It looks like a huge black polished cube. It's called the Kaaba. Around 600, a merchant, maybe he was 30 years old or so, began growing disenchanted with the system of belief of his people. His name was Muhammad. And by the time he was about 40 years old, it was his habit to go off to a cave outside of Mecca, where he claimed to be receiving messages from a prophet known from the Jewish and Christian traditions. We call this prophet, well, Christians call this prophet Gabriel. Jews call the prophet Gavriel. In Arabic, it's Jibril. Same name, Jibril. Muhammad would come back to Mecca and say that he'd been receiving divine messages from Allah, meaning from God, from the one God, through the angel of the one God, Jibril. And gradually, those messages became a book length of messages. Those messages collected together are called the scripture, the Quran, Q-U-R'-A-N. Used to be spelled Koran, K-O-R-A-N. It's the same word. The folks in Mecca did not like it because Muhammad was criticizing their beliefs. He was telling them, you are falsely believing in that which is not truly God. Essentially, he's telling them, you are idol worshippers. Nobody likes to be called an idol worshipper, especially if they are one. Eventually, Muhammad's teachings were so obnoxious to them that they kicked him out. The year 622 in the Christian reckoning is when Muhammad had his flight from Mecca. The Arabic word for escape, flight, is hijra, H-I-J-R-A, hijra. It's also called the hijra. The hijra is considered the beginning of the Muslim calendar era. So the Muslim calendar system begins in the year 622. He went to a smaller city further up the peninsula whose name is Yathrib, but it's called Al-Medina, Medina, meaning the state, the region. It was a smaller place, and he was able to take it over. So you have to realize that from the very beginning, Muhammad represents the different kind of spiritual figure than Jesus Christ represents. Very different model. And again, I'm not talking about this belief is true or that belief is false. I just want us to understand who is the person and what does he represent. Muhammad is what we call a warrior theocrat, someone who believes in military and physical power, but who is also teaching a religious message. In other words, he was a kind of a crusader. from the beginning. And he took over this city, and he essentially governed it in keeping with these messages that he's claiming to get from the prophet Jibril, and through that, from the one God. Is there anyone in the Christian tradition who's close to Muhammad? I would say yes. I would say John Calvin, in some ways, is reminiscent of Muhammad. Do you know the name John Calvin? Because Calvin became the advisor to the city council of the city of Geneva. Calvin was a lawyer. He wasn't a military man, but he became the advisor to the city government. And essentially, they only did what he told them to do. So he was occupied with the political task of running a city. Muhammad was too, occupied with the political task of running the city of Yathrib. But it wasn't enough for him. He didn't want to end up as a failure in Mecca and settle for Peoria. I hope I haven't insulted anyone who's coming from Peoria or Dubuque or someplace like that. He wanted the Big Apple. He wanted Mecca. So for the next 8 years, he engaged in a campaign to subjugate Mecca. He gradually took over one Arab tribe after another and arranged an economic boycott so that the caravans would not have any wealth pouring into Mecca. And he strangled Mecca until finally in the year 630, they opened their gates to him and he came back as a conqueror. For the last 2 years of his life, Muhammad was not only the leader of Medina, of Yathrib, he was also the leader of the capital city of Mecca, by which time he had unified all the various tribes of the Arabs. He created the Arab nation under the banner of monotheism, belief in the one God, and his book of what he claimed were revelations from the one God through the God's angel Jibril, became the sacred scriptures of this new religion and are to this day the Quran. Now, Muhammad taught a fairly simple religion. It didn't require a lot of arcane ceremonies. There were 5 obligations that, if one fulfilled all 5 of them, one could be an acceptably good Muslim. Number 1, a person had to make a declaration of faith to say that he believes or she believes in full faith that there is no God but the one God, and that Muhammad is his prophet. So that first half of that declaration would not distinguish him from Christians or from Jews, but the second half would. Because in Christianity, and certainly in Judaism, Muhammad is not considered a prophet. So that very first creedal element, the very first thing you need to do to be an acceptable Muslim, puts Islam in an adversarial position against the other 2 monotheistic faiths, against Christianity, against Judaism, because the adherents of Christianity, the adherents of Judaism, cannot say, I believe in full faith that Muhammad is the prophet of God. That's the defining mark of the Muslim. The other requirements are fairly familiar, although with some switcheroos. The Muslim is required to pray 5 times a day, 5 times during the daylight period, to the one God. The prayers are typically words that the whole community says together. It's not like saying grace at the last scene of a Blue Bloods episode. You ever watch Blue Bloods? Okay, remember, Jamie says, "I want to say grace today," and it's something special that's happened in that person's life. So we have fresh words. No, these prayers are very regimented. The same words every day. A big part of the worship is hearing selected words of the Quran. Just as you can go to a church and there's a lectionary, you hear a scriptural reading or 2 or 3 scriptural readings. You have the same thing in Muslim worship, except that the scriptures are the Quran. Daily prayer. Now, they also have a one day of the week which functions in a certain way like a Sabbath. Not Saturday, that's the Jewish Sabbath. Not Sunday, that's the Christian Sabbath. So Muhammad chose Friday to have a distinctively Muslim Sabbath day. And to this day, the Friday noontime prayer is the big gathering for Muslim worship. There's no obligation for a Muslim to pray in community. You can pray privately. You put down your rug so that there's no uncleanness on the earth that you're prostrating yourself on, and you bow in the direction of Mecca. Interestingly enough, at the very beginning of Islam, Muhammad told his followers to bow in the direction of Jerusalem. But then he got mad at the Jewish people, so he changed the direction to Mecca. I'm going to tell you a true and somewhat piquant story about a mosque which was built facing the wrong direction. I'll tell you that in a minute. The third of the 5 obligations to be a good Muslim is to give charity. It's called zakat, like the Hebrew word tzedakah, charity. And there's a particular sense that the alms are supposed to go towards Muslim religious needs. So giving charity doesn't mean give to the charity of your choice. Give to emphysema research or give for helping the autistic. No, it's very much specifically a Muslim-derived agenda of who should get the philanthropy. The fourth, and you may know about this because it's taking place right now, is fasting from sunup to sundown for 1 month of the year. 1 lunar month. It's called Ramadan. It starts when the crescent moon is first visible after new moon, and it goes for the 28, 29 days of the lunar month. You're supposed to not eat from the time that the pre-dawn sky begins to get light. And then you continue to not eat throughout the day. After dark, it's common to have a communal festive meal called iftar. I've gone to iftar meals, and it's a very nice kind of a mood. It's like a break fast. Ceremonially, people start with a date, which is a very sweet fruit that they start with. And the iftar is the time for people to come together and share the blessings of family and friendship. The idea of fasting is similar to the Christian idea of Lent. You want to use the time for introspection. You want to think about how could I be a better person. So Ramadan is certainly a very spiritual practice. And the fifth practice, which I've alluded to, is at least once in your life, you're supposed to make a pilgrimage to the capital city of the Muslim religion, and that is Mecca. And when you go there, there's a whole series of traditional activities that you're supposed to engage in, certain circuits, processions that you engage in. There's one point where you symbolically throw stones at the devil, and so on and so forth. And it's all around this central Kaaba that I described before. There can be hundreds of thousands of people in a given year. There can be millions of people on Hajj. The Arabic word Hajj H-A-J refers to this. So that's really what you need to do to be a Muslim. Of course, there are many details, but those are the fairly simple to state main requirements. Now, as I've described the religion, but also the biography of Muhammad, you probably have come to realize that the religion has two different aspects. It wants to establish peace internally. There's a strong sense in Islam that the members of this religion are a nation of Islam. I want to emphasize that, especially if we have mostly Christians in attendance tonight, because you probably remember from the writings of the Christian Saint Paul a sense of not nationalism, but universalism. Paul says that in Christ Jesus there is neither Jew nor Greek. Remember that line? That means that your national identity doesn't matter. If you're a Christian, it's supposed to be ecumenical. It's supposed to overcome that. Now, I know that there are some ethnic churches. Did you ever listen to Prairie Home Companion with Garrison Keillor? You know that if you're a Lutheran from Minnesota, your specific ethnicity is very, very important. And that they may doubt if anyone can be a good Christian if he doesn't enjoy lutefisk. You ever eat lutefisk? It's a cultural experience. I know there's some people who feel that way, but conceptually Christianity presents itself not as a nation, but as a transnational, universal community. Islam is very set in the fact that it is a nation of Islam. And inside the nation, there should be salam, the Arabic word for peace. Outside the nation is something different. Outside the nation is the realm of people who are distinguished by being kafir. Do you know what kafir is? A kafir is an unbeliever, an infidel. And infidels are supposed to be converted. Asked first, but subjugated if necessary. And I want to stand on this because it's not a politically correct thing to say, but it needs to be heard. The three monotheisms have different approaches to what to do about the rest of the world. The Jewish approach to what to do about the rest of the world is God gave everyone else a covenant already. It's called the covenant of the children of Noah. It's found in Genesis chapter 9. And someone who's not Jewish is fulfilling the covenant of Noah. As far as a Jew is concerned, they're doing what God wants them to do. There's no conversionist impulse in Judaism. Judaism receives people who want to become Jewish. It's part of my work every year. But I don't go out with a fishing rod. I don't know if the Baptist church that you came from ever had a tally for how many souls did this person win this year? How many souls did that pastor win this year? The altar call kind of thing, right?
Yeah, we have
An altar call, right? By the way, do you know that one of the most famous sermons in American history is the beginning of the American practice of the altar call? Did you know that? Sinners in the hands of an angry God. You ever hear that sermon? Oh boy, it scares the bejesus out of you. Some of you might die before the end of this winter. Some of you might die before the end of this sermon. And where will you go? By the way, I remember a billboard on Route 95 heading south, just north of Richmond. It's all black, but there are flames leaping up from the lower corner of the billboard. If you died tonight, where would you wake up? You remember that billboard? That's the kind of approach, right? So sometimes you want to intimidate people, but you don't exactly draw your sword upon them, right? That's different. That's considered what the Crusaders did, and that's not considered mainstream Christianity. By and large, Christianity follows what is called the Great Commission. Jesus tells his followers, go out and spread the good news. It doesn't mean beat them on the head with the good news. It means spread the good news. And there's different ways of doing that, right? Some is based on preaching or teaching. Some is just based by living a Christian life that people are free to observe. So in Judaism, there's no missionary impulse. In Christianity, there is a missionary impulse, but a non-violent one. In Islam, there is a missionary impulse, and it includes political violence. That's the major difference. Now, Muhammad died around the year 632. His successors, the Arabic word caliph, C-A-L-I-P-H, caliph. A caliph means a successor. His successors originally were his battle companions. And some of them were his family, actually. The first of them were his family members. They continued this practice of spreading the faith assertively, and I will say aggressively. Now, remember, there were two major empires, the Persian Empire and the Byzantine Empire. So looking at this as secular historians, let's ask ourselves the question, how could these Arab armies make a dent in those world empires? It's like the mouse that roared. Remember that TV? Remember that movie? You know, some little country that tries to invade the United States? Right. Well, let me switch movies. Who remembers Rocky? Okay. How badly beaten up are Apollo and Rocky by the 15th round? They're barely standing up. One of them can't see. They're basically just leaning on each other, right? That's when the Arab armies climbed into the ring. The Persians and the Byzantines were so bloodied by fighting each other that they were both ready to be pushed over. And that's what happened in the 600s. Between the 630s and the end of the century, the Persian Empire went out of business completely. It was totally subjugated. I think 657 was when the last Persian emperor was killed. The Byzantine Empire was almost completely destroyed, but the walls of Byzantium, the capital city, were so formidable, and the Greeks had invented a form of what today we call napalm. They called it Greek fire. And of course, ships then were wooden ships. So any strike by Greek fire anywhere on the ship, and it burns down to the waterline. So the assault on Constantinople failed several times, and the Byzantine Empire survived. And then eventually, some years it was larger, some years it was smaller. So by the 700s, there was still a Byzantine Empire, there was no more Persian Empire, and the Arab state had grown from just Arabia to the following borders. I want you to imagine, okay, we are old enough to have actually had geography lessons in grade school. So I dare say you're going to know what I'm talking about, although sometimes I have to put it on the board for my young students. So imagine going from east to west. Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Jordan, Israel, Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, Morocco, Algeria, across Gibraltar into Spain. One state. I imagine that. That's a big state without telecommunications. right? News travels at the pace of a dromedary camel in that empire. Think about that. Wow. Now, how do you get to be such a large state between the year 632 and the year 750? Not by playing defense alone, right? So historically, the claim that Islam is only interested in defending itself is refuted by obvious geography. The mandate is called jihad, to struggle against unbelief, which means against unbelievers. And it succeeded. It succeeded very, very well. Why didn't the rest of the Christian West become Muslim? Well, there's two answers. Do you know there's a lawyer in Norfolk whose nickname is the Hammer? You ever see those TV commercials? Right. Well, there was a Frankish king whose nickname was the Hammer. Charles Martel, Carolus Martellus. Martellus is the Latin word for hammer. He must have been one tough hombre. And he led his Frankish knights in a successful battle against the Arab invading army in the year 732 and pushed the Arabs out of France. So Spain became their border on the west. But then something else happened, which is the real answer. Such a large state was hard to govern from Damascus, Syria, which was the capital, and the dynasty of caliphs, successors to Muhammad, was becoming more and more unpopular. So there was a coup, and a new dynasty took over. And the new caliph was a guy named Ibn Abbas, and this is called the Abbasid Caliphate. And he thought that there was more riches, more field for success looking east rather than looking west, which is true, because if you're in the Middle East and you're looking east, you're looking at the Great Silk Road. You're looking at the Indian Ocean, the Persian Gulf, India, much, much more wealth than the backwards feudal world of the Carolingians in France. So he transferred the capital to move it further east, not Damascus, but the new city that he built, Baghdad, which is Baghdad, Iraq today. He built it in the year 750. And so the political energies of Islam began looking east instead of west, but not before it had conquered all of North Africa, all of Spain, all of the Middle East, except for a little circle of the Byzantine Empire. And it became a very powerful state and a world religion. Now I want to tell you two more things about this world religion. Then I want to tell you a few more things about this world religion. First of all, it had a very damaging internal schism, which continues to reverberate until literally today. Remember I told you that the Persian Empire was conquered completely. That doesn't mean that the Persians who were in that empire acquiesced. They were the heirs of a 1,000 years old civilization, a great empire that had withstood the might of Rome and that withstood the armed cataphracts of the Byzantines. And they were conquered by a bunch of camel-riding yahoos. They weren't going to take that. So they converted to Islam, but a different kind of Islam. See, back in the Middle Ages, when everybody is religious, if you choose this sect and not that sect, you're making a political statement. It's not just that I like the punch and cookies in this church better than that church. Or this church doesn't tolerate noisy kids and that's fine by me. Or that church does tolerate noisy kids and that's fine by me. Right? That's why we choose one or another nowadays, right? But back then, you chose this or that flavor of the religion that you had to belong to because it expressed certain political ideas. And the political ideas of the Persians showed up in a new kind of Islam called Shiite Islam, as opposed to Sunni Islam, which is the main form of Islam. Shiite Islam is with us to this day. It's the kind of religious life of Iran. It is very focused on death, martyrhood, and getting into heaven because you're a martyr. There's a month in the Shiite calendar, this is not a Muslim festival in general, where there's a procession through the streets and the bravest of the young men take chains and they beat themselves until their whole back is bloody. Every step, whack! Another step, whack! They're considered the heroes. Behind them are those who aren't quite as brave. Every step and whap against their breastbone with the flat of it until they're completely bruised. But they're not, drawing blood with a metal whip. And they are the second tier, second echelon of heroes. The religion says that if you die in battle, you have the most wonderful heavenly afterlife. You may have heard the notion that every male warrior gets 72 regenerative virgins. By the way, I have a joke on that, if I may. Anyone here under 18? Bless you. Here's the joke. The joke is Osama bin Laden. Remember that name? He dies, he goes to what he thinks is Muslim paradise. The first person he meets is George Washington, who gives him a whop like this. Next person he meets is George Mason, who gives him a flack like that. And the third one is Thomas Jefferson, who was not very violent, but he did the same thing. And Osama is reeling. He says, "Wait a minute, what about my 72 virgins?" And the angel smiles and says, No, you get 72 Virginians. Thought you'd like that. So, why am I so concerned about this one feature of Shiite Islam? Because the most Shiite place in the world, Iran, is right now a nuclear threshold state. Now, let's think about recent history. Richard Nixon was not the most ethical of presidents. He was pretty smart, though. Richard Nixon and Leonid Brezhnev successfully negotiated something called SALT I. Anybody remember SALT I? Strategic Arms Limitation Talks, round one. It was based on a counterintuitive idea that, by golly, it worked. No defensive weapons were permitted against intercontinental ballistic missiles, or a very, very small number of defensive weapons, a ring around Washington, D.C., a ring around Moscow, but not a comprehensive group. What was the idea behind that? It was called MAD, which is not the same thing as MADD. MADD is Mothers Against Drunk Driving. MAD is Mutual Assured Destruction. And here's the psychology behind it. Americans want to live, so they're not going to launch a first strike knowing that the Soviets will have enough counterpunch ability, no matter what, to launch a retaliatory strike that'll destroy America. Even if there's no Soviet Union left, there'll be no America left either. And the Americans relied upon the Soviets to have the same calculation. And why? Because the Soviets were atheists. They didn't believe that there's a life after this life. Why give up your life? You can't say you've won the war if you're dead 90 minutes later. Is that a deterrent to a nuclear power whose religious teaching is that if we die as martyrs, the good times are just beginning? See the problem? Allowing Iran to have become a nuclear threshold state, I don't know whether we'll recover from that mistake. It's a mistake we made in the last 10 years. I honestly don't know if we're going to be able to contain that. I hope I'm wrong. So the Shiite-Sunni split started in the late 600s. The Shiites believed that the caliph has to be a biological descendant of Muhammad or his close family. And the Sunni said, no, it just has to be someone acceptable to the ummah, to the nation. That's the technical reason for their split. But if you look at the demographics of it, you see that the Shiite Islam is the Persian Empire come back to life again with a new dark theology, very much focused on death and the hope of a good afterlife based on martyrdom. The second important thing to realize about the career of Islam is that for several centuries, Islam had a higher level of civilization than Christendom did. More mathematics, more engineering, more physics, more philosophy, more city, urban life, more highly developed economics. One of my history professors gave me one little point, and that proved it for me beyond a shadow of doubt. In the Muslim world, you could bribe a corrupt official by writing a check. In the Christian world, you had to hand over a bag of gold or silver. In other words, the economy had developed paper money and had developed notes of credit. That's a very sophisticated degree of economics, if you think about it. That you pull something out of your wallet, it's green and has a picture of George Washington on it, and it's worth something that we all agree upon. That takes a lot of sophistication to buy that, right? You could do that in the Muslim world in the 900s or the 1000s or the 1100s or the 1200s. You couldn't do that in the Christian world. However, the Christian world caught up and surpassed the Muslim world. It caught up and surpassed the Muslim world because of certain features of Western history that you've probably studied. You've studied about the Renaissance, which is a whole reorientation to this world, this life. Make this life a better life. It's not that you don't believe in heaven, but you focus on this life right here. And after that, even more so, the scientific revolution, which leads to the industrial revolution, which leads to stronger armies. Right? The economic developments of this more secularized world and the military-industrial synthesis of an industrial revolution meant that by the late 1600s, certainly by the 1700s and 1800s, the armies of Christian states are defeating the armies of Muslim states over and over again. The last Muslim empire that was strong enough to defeat many, many other states was the Ottoman Empire. Truly a strong, strong empire. It was at the gates of Vienna. It had conquered Hungary. It was at the gates of Vienna in 1683. Do you know about the Siege of Vienna? I want to tell you about that because it's a turning point in human history. The Sultan declared a jihad, a religious war, against the Holy Roman Emperor, who was Catholic, 1683. His army advances up the Danube River, winning battle after battle. They get to, it wasn't the beautiful blue Danube then, it was running red. They get up to Vienna and they besiege Vienna. The Holy Roman Emperor skips town. He doesn't want to get caught. He goes upriver. And he sends out an urgent appeal to his fellow Catholic monarch, the King of Poland. whose name was Jan Sobieski. And Jan Sobieski honors their defensive treaty and sends his cavalry down to Vienna. Vienna is surrounded by a ring of hills. Check out this date, September 11th. That date ring a bell? September 11th, 1683. Jan Sobieski's Polish cavalry scale the heights of these mountains ringing Vienna. It's a little bit like the Army Rangers scaling Pont du Hoc after D-Day. Those of you who remember the story of the invasion of Normandy will know how important that was, right? The next morning they come crashing down on the Turkish army where the Ottomans weren't expecting them. They got their fustus with the mostus. Huge, huge military victory over the Turks. And it was like the Pickett's Charge moment in the Confederate history. The Turks never recovered from their losses there. They retreated and retreated and retreated. And 16 years later, they signed a peace treaty for the first time in their history where they were ceding and yielding territory. And they never stopped yielding territory until World War I when they went out of existence. That was the high water mark. I want to tell you just a little factoid because it's so interesting. The poor people of Vienna were starving. They'd been besieged all summer. September 12th, the Turkish army disappears in a hurry. It retreated not in good order, and so they left their stores and their camp to be plundered. The Viennese were starving. They rushed out of the gates of Vienna. They plundered the Turkish camp. They brought back food. And from that moment on, two foods entered the Western lexicon. Number one, coffee. Turkish coffee. And that's why the Viennese to this day have a coffee, they're hooked on coffee even worse than I am. I mean, if we have a Navy veteran, he would get that, right? And of course, they like their coffee not the way the Navy likes it, but they like it with schlag, with thick layers of a foamy cream on top of it, Kaffee mit Schlag, right? That's one food craze. The other craze is, anyone here speak German? The word Beugel, Beugel, is cognate to the word buckle in English, and it means a stirrup, a horse cavalryman's stirrup, so that you can stand up in the saddle and wield your saber or whatever weapon the cavalryman wants to wield while standing in the saddle. So the Viennese bakers created these stirrup-shaped, like croissants, right, pastries, in honor of the Polish cavalry who defended them, the Beugel. And eventually, over time, someone pinched the two ends together and gave us the bagel. Did you know that's where the bagel comes from? So you forget everything else I say tonight, you're going to remember that, right? Worth the price of admission, right there. Viennese coffee and a bagel, and I'm good to go. Okay, now I want to tell you what happened in the world of Islam when they began losing battle after battle after battle. Two different approaches. One approach is, the West is beating us. We should learn from them. We should learn what their secret of success is. And that leads to various Muslim and Arab attempts to modernize, to create a modern Western-style force. So, for example, the founder of modern Turkey, Kemal Atatürk, insisted that Turkey should be a secular state because he wanted to aspire to the strengths of the Western states that he saw were all successful. After all, the Ottoman Empire had been defeated by the British in World War I. He wanted to absorb the kind of strength that the British had. That's one approach, Arab nationalism, which has room for the secular. And therefore, it had room for religious toleration, because part of Western secular tradition is to make religion a more private choice, We're going to talk about this in the last lecture. If you choose to worship in that church on that side of the street, and I choose to worship in this church on that side of the street, those are private decisions. It's not fighting words. We can do all sorts of things together. We can shelter the homeless together. We can have a Red Cross blood drive together. We can take care of a food pantry together. And so you have Mass, and I only have Mass once a month, and he doesn't have Mass except twice a year, and they don't have Mass at all, and they pray in Hebrew, and they pray in Latin, and they pray in English, and there's different roads to the same God. That's a classic, modern, contemporary American way of thinking about it. So a more secular world tends to be a religiously more tolerant world for that reason. That's why a place like Turkey from the 1920s until a few decades ago was a place of more religious toleration. But certain things happened about 45 years ago that moved in another direction. Two events in quick succession. One event was the Iranian Revolution, 1979. Remember that the Shah was an American creation. There was a Western versus communist rivalry, Cold War era rivalry. Who's going to control Iran? The British had interests in Persia. The Soviets had interests in Persia. They were each trying to control Iran in the early post-World War II period. The CIA created a coup, took out the communist leading Mossadegh, the prime minister, and put in the Shah, a Western-oriented Iran, but not democratically oriented, relied upon Savak, the secret police. The Iranians were chafing under his repressive rule, and they selected a religious figurehead to express their opposition to their autocratic Shah. And they supported the Ayatollah Khomeini. Remember that name? They brought him back from exile. They rose up against the Shah. They threw out the Shah, and they created this Islamic Republic. It's not a republic, it's a theocracy. It's run by the mullahs. And it is to this day. It's a religious dictatorship, but it's not a secular dictatorship. So the currents of westernizing, secularizing modernism bring the Muslim world up to par with the European and American world by emulating what works for Europe and America. That was nipped in the bud in Iran in 1979. And the next thing, very, very important, in the fall of 1981, I think it's the fall of 1981, the assassination of the president of Egypt, Anwar el-Sadat. Remember, Sadat had flown to Jerusalem at the invitation of the Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin. And under the brokership of the American president, Jimmy Carter, they went to Camp David and they hammered out a peace treaty. Egypt would regain all of the Sinai Desert Peninsula that it had lost. By the way, Israel tried to give them back Gaza too, but they said, we don't want it. You're stuck with it. That tells you something about who wants Gaza. Egypt didn't want it. So Sadat, the brave man who made peace, was gunned down. Any other Arab leaders quick to make peace after that? Well, there was King Hussein of Jordan, also a very brave man. He also survived assassination attempts. But by and large, that was it for the progress on the Arab-Israel issue. And what's the bottom line obstacle to peace there? It goes back to this notion that's as old as the 630s. The world is divided into two zones, says Muhammad. Internally is the house of Islam. We have to have peace internally. Externally is the house of the sword, Dar al-Harb in Arabic. There can be no peace with infidels. It's against our religion, says Muhammad. There can be a truce. The most you can have is a truce. But you may not, as a good Muslim, sign a treaty of peace with someone who's an infidel. You're commanded to bring them under the rule of the one God. And if they say they have one God, it's not good enough. You're a Christian, you've got monotheism 2.0. You're a Jew, you've got monotheism 1.0. We've got monotheism 3.0. You need our kind of monotheism. That's why there's no peace in Gaza today. Because Hamas is a fundamentalist, also a terrorist organization, a proxy for Iran, which is in full belief that there needs to be warfare until the world comes to understand the way we understand it. So don't be confused by the news cycle. Now, when Muslim armies were losing over and over again, starting in 1683 and again in the 1700s and again in the 1800s, there began to be a penitential movement in the Arab world. It was called Wahhabism, because it was taught by a preacher whose name was Ibn Wahhab, W-A-H-H-A-B. And his message essentially is this: if there's only one God, and it's Allah, and we understand God aright, why is Allah having us lose to the infidels time and again? What are we doing wrong? What do we have to do right so that Allah will grant us victory? And Ibn Wahhab's answer is, we have to be stricter. We can't be a dollar at 10 o'clock scholar. We have to be serious about our Islam. Okay, no more drinking on the side. No more tolerating infidels on the side. No more flirting with Western fashions. No more letting our women walk around without their heads covered. Don't by any means let your women drive. That's wrong. Muhammad doesn't want a woman to drive. What can the West give us? The West wants to give us beatniks and bikinis. We don't need that. That's not the godly way. We know the godly way, and it's a rejection of the West. And it's a rejection of all the projections of the West. Now, Wahhab sounds a little bit like Jonathan Edwards, some particularly dour 18th century theologian. However, I want you to know that Wahhabism is the official creed that's taught in parochial schools around the world funded with Saudi money. Because it's a little bit like hush money. The Saudi government is not looking at the world that way, but they know that if they give those folks control of the curriculum, they're buying peace. They're buying internal peace. They're like paying off their own would-be Osamas. So Wahhabism, which is explicitly against the values of the modern West, including the values of religious compromise, is the curriculum of the typical madrasa today. So we need to know this about the world around us. Islam is a great world religion, no doubt about that. It has a struggle for its soul going on right now. There are those who want to find a way to bring out the best of the West with their tradition. And there are those who just want to oppose the West. Right now, those guys are getting more of the oxygen in the room. I will close with the fond hope that the reformers within the Islamic world can have a little more success too. Thank you for your attention.
Do we have any questions? If so, I will bring the microphone up so that you can ask your question, so everyone can hear. So raise your hand. No questions tonight?
Please, could you remind me of your name?
Yes, Linda Benson.
Linda Benson, thank you.
Yes, so they believe in God, and you have it with a capital. Is it the same God we believe in originally?
That's a very good question. One God is just one God. Now, do two Christians have the same notion of God? Um, almost, right? Almost, not quite, right? Does a Shiite and a Sunni Muslim have the same notion of God? Almost, not quite. But remember that it's not just the belief in one God. The statement of belief is there is no God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet. So the one God of Islam is the God who is believed to have dictated all the commandments in the Quran to the world, including the commandment to wage war against infidels. So yes, one God is one God, but that's not the totality of belief.
So when he went to the cave and Gabriel spoke to him, that's where they're coming from then. He has put those writings as the
That's the scripture.
that's what they need to believe.
Not only that, but in those areas where the Christian Bible or the Jewish Bible differ from that, it's because Christians and Jews have not been good custodians of their text. We got it wrong.
Thank you.
Yes.
Anyone else? I hear.
Let me tell you about the next. Let me tell you about the next program we're going to do. Judy, though, I don't know, are we out of space on the Passover Seder? I just don't know.
Are we what?
Out of space.
No.
We have more space?
Actually.
Could you explain it a little bit?
I'm not supposed to have received invitations or requests for the Seder, but I already have, I think, 13 people on the list. So if anyone is really interested, you're on it. May 1st, the Seder meal will be done here in this room.
Did we say 4:30 or something like that?
We'll gather at 4 and it will
Gather at
begin
4.
at 4:30. So everyone has to be seated at that time.
Right, so that you'll be having dinner by the time you like to have dinner.
Well, no, so that the dining room can serve us.
Well, they need to do that too. Although the dining room does a real good job of
Yes, they do.
accommodating
They
Seder.
do.
So that's May 1st.
May
And
1st.
we have two more lectures in this series. One, I think, is the 29th of May.
Of May,
Yes, and that is
yes.
the religions of South Asia, Hinduism and Buddhism. I dare say those are two religions that in this room we know less about than, say, we know about Christianity or Judaism. And it behooves us to learn about them. They're major world religions. They have some very interesting things to teach. They come from a different starting point than the religions that we know better, but it's worth educating ourselves. And the last one is at the end of June. I don't know why. I can't remember the date.
Well, there's no sense in telling us the end of June because we won't remember.
Well, we'll tell you again.
Update you as time goes on so you get it on your calendar.
I think it's the last Wednesday in June. And it's the question, I began to touch upon it this evening. What happens to religion in modern times? How is your Christianity different than your great-grandmother's? I dare say it is different, right? And looking at it as historians, can we understand how that happened? So that's what we're looking at in our last. So it's not just one religion, it's all of us who live in this society, what is it about living here that has made the experience of being religious quite different? And I've got some theories on that too.
So we'll hear that in the next couple months. And if nobody else has any questions, I thank you all for coming, and I think we should thank the rabbi.
Have a good night, everyone.
As usual.